Excellence. I have my able partner, Latif Surakatu, on the call, and he will basically open the webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Many thanks, Timothy. Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed panelists and participants, distinguished guests, I have the pleasure to welcome you to this edition of our FEMS webinar. Of course, it's a pleasure that I welcome you to this event, where we will review the most critical aspect of modern business practices, the environmental, social, and governance implementation, what we refer to as ESG. You will agree with me that it is now very important for businesses across the globe to relook the impact of ESG factors and how it impacts the long-term success of businesses. Today, we have the opportunity to embark on a journey of exploration where we will be discussing the keys to unlocking sustainable success and excellence within the corporate realm. Over the next few minutes, our esteemed industry experts and leaders will embark on thought-provoking visionaries, and we share their valuable insights and experiences. And I believe that they will do justice to the different, concerns and, of course, questions that we all have for us to drive this conversation. And essentially, the imperative is for us to understand how we can use ESG to drive corporate excellence and pave the way for a sustainable future. I implore everyone here to participate actively. The platform allows us to acquire knowledge and also collaborate and dialogue. Please ask questions, clarify when necessary, and together we will chart the cause and paths towards sustainable success that transcends boundaries and paves way for brighter future and more resilient future in our corporate organizations. Once again, I welcome everyone to this August occasion. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you very much, Latif. And that's just the welcome and opening remarks by Latif, a partner in charge of business advisory services at Andersen in Nigeria. I would introduce my panelists very soon, but before I do that, I would like to lay background to the topic of the day. And I'm presenting to you what the flow of the event looks like. We're going to look at the background of the issues. I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll have the panel session, which is going to be very exciting. I can assure you of that. We'll take questions from you. We've gotten some of your questions when you were registering for the event. We're going to get some questions live. Use the Q&A icon to send in your questions, and then we'll close the event thereafter. So basically, I'll give you an introduction to the topic of the day. We'll have the key issues, and then we launch into the questions. Again, the topic is unlocking the path to sustainable success, ESG implementation imperatives for corporate excellence. And you may want to ask, what exactly is sustainable success? Why is it different from every other success that we'll talk about? I'm sure our panelists will say more about that as we go on, but I can already tell you that it's all about how long-term you take a view in terms of the long-term view you take in terms of the success of your organization, not just for today, but for the current and future generation. And from a business perspective, sustainable success is basically adopting the practices that consider the impact on the environment, the society, and of course, governance. And of course, while you're doing that, you're not losing track of profitability and competitiveness. So, but I'm sure again that by the time we go into the panel session, we'll get more breadth on that aspect from our panelists. And I think Latif has already told us that ESG is basically an acronym for environmental, social, and governance. This is basically non-financial factors that are used to assess the performance of a company. Now, why do you even have to think about ESG? Why are we thinking about how it helps to achieve corporate excellence? Because it helps you to manage your risk. It helps you with cost savings and efficiency, with innovation and competitiveness. It helps you to take a long-term view of the business, and it helps you to manage stakeholders. And you can imagine the results of that. But the truth is that things are changing in our world today. There is a changing regulatory climate in the world, and not just in the world, but in Nigeria itself. Just on the 26th of June, for instance, the IFRS and the ISSB launched the new IFRS S1 and S2 that have to do with the implementation of new accounting standards, more or less, sustainability standards. But now anyone who uses the IFRS standards to prepare the financial statement would also have to look at these new standards that are surrounding issues around sustainability and climate-related disclosures, right? So in Nigeria, of course, the Security and Exchange Commission had issued a regulation in 2019 that also requires listed companies to submit sustainability reports. But what I just said to you is that there is a need for more synergy. There is a need for more collaboration between the bodies. And it's also very important that every corporate entity now takes this as an issue that is at the front burner of the organizations. The NSE in itself, or any company that is listed, also expects that companies that are listed will develop sustainability disclosures, and they would submit their reports as well. The CBN has its own rules, even the CAMA has its own rules. And just last year, even though we had the act passed sometimes in 2021, in Nigeria, we had a Climate Change Act passed, but just last year, we had the body, I mean, the regulatory body put into proper place in terms of giving it a director general. And today they are setting up to ensure that things are really working with respect to the Climate Change Council in Nigeria. Like I mentioned, it's not just about Nigeria. Across the world, I mentioned the issues around the IFRS, for instance, but even in the EU, the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive also went into force in January 2023. So a lot of things happening within this space, and the sort of organizations that we pride ourselves in rendering services to are global organizations that sometimes looking into assessing funds, not just from Nigerian investors, but from global investors. And so it's then very important to put this issue at the front burner. So what are the burning issues really? The point is that to navigate the evolving business climates, companies need to change from the compliance-focused approach to embracing sustainable business transformation, right? And this would mean that you integrate sustainability into your corporate strategy, into your operations, into supply chain, and stakeholder engagement. Ultimately, looking is that sustainability would be at the front burner, and it's not just something that is good to have, but is a prerequisite for business success in the world of today. Companies that recognize this and proactively embrace sustainable practices, of course, will position themselves for long-term success. Okay, so again, how is sustainability shaping today's business climate? We see even stakeholders are changing in terms of what their expectations are: customers, employees, investors, the sort of organizations that employees want to work for. And we've seen that already happening. The Japa syndrome is not just about the country, it's also about the sort of environment that every employer provides to employees. That determines whether they're going to stay or not, right? Business resilience and risk management are also very critical issues that we need to pay attention to sustainability considerations have become very crucial for business resilience. And it's then very important to pay attention to these issues. Innovation and competitive advantage is yet another thing that sustainability allows for. I talked about access to capital investment opportunities, because the sort of investment that you want to attract as an organization is not just local, but foreign investment. And because of that, you want to do things on a global scale, and you want to pay attention to how things are being done the world over. Then long-term value creation is yet another thing, and also helps in the long run to save energy. Think about energy-efficient technologies that help to reduce operational expenses, or waste reduction measures that minimize disposal cost and all of that, for instance. Those are things that are sustainable in the principles that underpin them. So by adopting these sustainable solutions, the point is that businesses would enhance their bottom line, they reduce their environmental footprint as well. So how do you do this? You need to define a sustainable vision, conduct a sustainability assessment, set sustainable goals and targets. Then you want to integrate sustainability into your core business operations and engage stakeholders, invest in sustainable innovation, enhance reporting and transparency, collaborate and learn from others, and monitor and adapt. And that's where you can basically foster a culture of continuous improvement. I talked about this, so I won't belabor it. We now have two new standards released by the ISSB as well as the IFRS. And this will then mean that companies begin to look into how they report, even with their financial statements. So before now, we pay attention to just the numbers, but much more importantly now, not just about the numbers, but how we get at the numbers, how we sustain those numbers, and how we improve those numbers that will be driven by factors around sustainability and climate-related issues. And the way to look at this generally is that for IFRS 1, the objective is to make a company disclose material information about the sustainability-related risk and opportunities. For IFRS S2, what you're looking at are the climate-related risk and opportunities. While IFRS S1 is looking at sustainability as a whole, S2 is looking at climate-related issues, and the way they've been put together is such that we're looking at governance issues, the strategy issues, and then risk management, and what are the metrics and targets that have been set by the company to be achieved over a period of time with respect to sustainability issues and climate-related issues. So these disclosures will be very important, and it's a case of not just looking at how the company impacts on the environment, but how the environment also impacts on the company. And when I say environment, not just the physical environment, but the social environment as well as the governance environment, sometimes political environment too. Not to bother you so much about that, the disclosure steps that are required is really to identify the objective of the sustainability reporting. You want to master your data, perform a test plan, and then address and refine the results, communicate the results to stakeholders, to the relevant shareholders of the company as well. And the whole idea is that you want to continue to track and verify the sustainability-related information that will not allow for what is called greenwashing. I believe that as we go on, as the panelists continue to maybe beam some more light on the issues of the day, we'll have clarity to some issues. I already see Hans raised, probably to clarify some of the points that have been raised already, but I can assure you that justice will be done to whatever questions you have in the course of the webinar. I will then join you, however, to drop your questions in the Q&A, so we'll pick them up from there. What will ESG really do for an organization? What does integrating sustainability reporting into your compliance reporting do? It gives room for enhanced transparency, improved comparability across the world, especially when you look at it from the eyes of the IFRS. What IFRS has done for accounting is that you can pick up the financial statements of company A and compare it with that of B, because there is a standard for measuring what revenue is. And going forward, we can do something similar. We can expect to do something similar for sustainability related issues in the documents that's here based on IFRS. Streamlined reporting processes is yet another thing that is achieved with the IFRS. Investor confidence and decision making is also enhanced, and of course, regulatory compliance. Not to belabor those issues, the key issue with the IFRS S1 and S2 is really about incorporating them into the established sustainability framework. And it's very important to have these on board, because very many organizations that are already doing things in the right way have been aligning with the GRI, which is a global reporting initiative, in preparing their sustainability reports. So going forward, the expectation is that given that the IFRS Foundation in itself signed the memorandum of understanding to have the sort of work program with the GRI, there will be no, what I would call a total disruption of the reporting framework. But it's then important to also synergize for every organization that seeks to do things the right way. I mentioned earlier a couple of acts in Nigeria that govern issues around sustainability, around ESG, the Climate Change Act of 2021, the Petroleum Act, Industry Act of 2021 for companies within the oil and gas industry, the Environmental Impact Assessment Act of 2004, and a couple of others. For the banking sector, there is a lot of light to that aspect as well. So the point is that companies have to do things differently in our current times. As I conclude this short presentation, I want to highlight the importance for businesses to pay attention to sustainability, because if they don't, the continuity of such organizations will be impaired in no time. What we do at Andersen is that, recognizing the importance of these ESG factors, we take proactive measures with our clients to address whatever issues and develop strategies for them, help them to even provide assurance reports where necessary, highlighting whatever gaps they have and how to bridge those gaps. So we see ESG proposition as a crucial element in providing services to our clients. Our engagement and materiality assessment, ESG and climate change advocacy. We do capacity enhancement, benchmarking of ESG and developmental performance, due diligence, review of ESG operations. We do ESG risk assessments. We do assessments of ESG performance, even for supply chain and monitoring of ESG compliance by suppliers. So that's about it. I'll introduce my panelists for the day as we go on. So on the list, I have Lateef Surakat, who is a partner and head business advisory services at Andersen in Nigeria. Lateef is the partner and head of the Business Advisory Services Group at Andersen in Nigeria, as mentioned. He has over 16 years of experience in the provision of enterprise risk management framework, business continuity plan, corporate governance review, internal audit review, internal control review, accounting and financial reporting services to clients in various industries. He's provided extensive accounting advisory services to clients in diverse industries. He's handled various assignments such as institutional transformation, sector and organizational reforms, finance strategy formulation, finance function transformation and redesign, blueprints development and implementation. And of course, prior to joining Andersen, he was an associate director in accounting advisory services unit of KPMG Nigeria. He's led a number of accounting and financial reporting projects for private and public sector clients. Lateef, you're very welcome to this webinar. I also have Neha Malhotra. Neha is our Indian partner in charge of sustainability and ESG solutions, Nigeria Andersen. Neha is a partner with the firm for sustainability and ESG solutions. He has over 15 years experience serving several multinational companies and domestic clients on diverse matters. Sustainability domain experience encompasses advising on developing a robust sustainability and ESG framework, greenhouse gas accounting, and decarbonization strategy. I can tell you reliably that, NEA has provided services to clients in Nigeria. A focus area also includes social and governance, with special mention to areas specific to areas of social responsibility, board and top management, governance, human resources, gender, and other social related matters. She worked with EY and British Telecom. She is a certified sustainability professional with ICAI, certified in sustainable investing from Harvard Business School, US, and currently pursuing a CFA, sustainable investing from the CFA Institute. She is an eminent speaker at both domestic and global platforms on governance and sustainable investing. And I can tell you, NEA is a very great add to the conversation of today. Thank you very much, NEA, for joining the webinar for today. I also have on our list, Chioma Afe. She's a director, external affairs and sustainability. It's a privilege to have her on the call. She is a director at Seplat Energy PLC. She's an accomplished strategic senior communications executive and business leader. She has a record of success in developing and implementing high impact communication strategies that drive business growth, enhance brand reputation, and drive revenue growth. In her present role as Director, External Affairs and Sustainability for Seplat Energy PLC, she leads a diverse team of professionals in managing the corporate brand profile, varied external stakeholders in the oil and gas industry, and ensuring internal strategic alignment with the ESG goals of the organization. So you can see why she's on this call. She has served in various organizations prior to Seplat Energy, most recently at the Access Bank Group, where she was head of the group head for marketing and communications. She is a member of the Africa leadership team. Prior to that, she was the head of corporate communications at Diamond Bank PLC. She's also worked in DSTV, that's MultiChoice Nigeria Limited, Cadbury Mondelez, Airtel, Coca-Cola Nigeria, British American Tobacco, Andersen, and Tequila Nigeria Limited in various leadership and managerial capacities. Such a loaded CV there. She's a board member of Women in Management, Business, and Public Service, that's WIMBIS, and ESCO member of the Advertisers Association of Nigeria. And I must also mention that Chioma is happily married with 4 beautiful children. Thank you very much, Chioma, for joining us on the call. I have John Okoro, the head environmental health, safety and quality at Axilla Group. He is a passionate quality health, safety and environmental and sustainability professional with proven experience in developing and implementing effective QHSE processes and structures for corporate organizations. He's successfully led QHSE teams to provide support for mainstream projects and operations with great industry milestone QHSE records. His previous experience saw him playing oversight quality assurance and quality control roles in the delivery of several projects across top oil and gas players in Nigeria. Since joining Axilla in 2012, John has been a key team player responsible for planning, implementing, monitoring, and optimizing operational processes in the areas of environmental health, occupational safety, and quality management. And I can tell you reliably that very recently, Axilla was celebrated for being a top performer within that space of engineering in materials and methodological engineering from the Federal University of Technology, Owerri. And he has an MBA from the Business School in Netherlands. He has several QHSE certifications from notable bodies like AWS, API, Bosch, and ASNT. He's a current registered engineer and a member of the Nigerian Society of Engineers. I have Modupe Ogungbe on the call as well. She's the lead research and publications expert at Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. So you see theme of panelists are very broad and balanced. We have, gender balance, we have experience balance. John Okoro is an engineer. Modupe is a lawyer, and several other experts, accountants, and whatever you want on this call, you have them all. Modupe is a corporate governance and human rights law scholar. She's a lead researcher for the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. She has LLB from Coventry University, LLM Corporate Governance and Law from the University of Portsmouth, LLM International Human Rights Law from the University of Reading, and the Bachelor of Law from the Nigerian Law School. She is, I can say reliably that she is a solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. She is very passionate about climate change and ESG related matters. Thank you very much, Modupe, for joining us. And you have myself, Ombu Moderator. I'm a senior manager at Andersen in Nigeria. So thank you all for joining this call. And I can assure you once again that it's going to be a very great ride this morning. Given all of the background that I laid out earlier, I would like to begin by asking my panelists some of the questions that bother my mind before I begin to take questions from the participants. So participants, please indulge me as I would take my own questions first. So Lateef, I will come to you straight on. Your practice in Andersen supports companies on accounting and business advisory matters, for instance. So let's start from the basic. How does reporting, whether financial or non-financial, help a corporate organization to achieve excellence? You've done a lot of reporting support for organizations. How does it add up?
Okay, many thanks, Temitope, for that question. And I was wondering why I was the first person to go, but it's okay. Very succinctly, if you check, a business does not operate in isolation. So a business operates within an environment, within a society, community, and of course, what that means is that they are stakeholders. And essentially, all stakeholders, be it internal and external, would like to have a view of how the business that operates within their environment, community, how the business performs, how the business impact, them, either in terms of, business relationship, either in terms of, the impact the business, creates in their own area of interest, so to say. And what you then see is that as a business, you then need to be able to provide that information that will allow the different stakeholders to have a view of how you perform, to have a view of how you impact their interest. And that is why it's important to be able to bring both the financial and the non-financial information together in form of what we call financial statements. And essentially, for the different businesses, and depending on their maturity and where they operate, for listed entities, for instance, it goes beyond financial statements. Of course, it is expected that they prepare what we call annual reports, and this then has a number of other information, that are both quantitative and qualitative. So there's a need to bring them together so that the different stakeholders, for instance, we talk about internal stakeholders of a business. It will not just include, the directors. It will include the employees. If you also talk about, the external environment where, business operates, you have external stakeholders. Of course, the bankers that each business relates with will also need to have a view of how the business is performing. More importantly, how the performance of that business is impacting, the business they do with the bank, with them. If you also look at community, especially for the oil and gas, companies, the community where they operate, the oil and gas operations impact the community. And essentially, the community stakeholders will have interest in knowing the performance of the business and how the activities, have impacted their community are properly reported, so that it can give a view, holistic view of that business. Now, the main topic of discussion is around sustainability and, of course, climate-related, issues today. And as such, I think one of the things that over time we've seen working with different clients along the lines of strategy, risk, financial reporting, is that a whole number of sustainability related activities and disclosure, including climate related disclosure, in the course of trying to get out financial reports or financial statements, internally, you find out that it's quite very difficult for many businesses to have an alignment in that reporting. So what that speaks to is that you have quantitative information that may not have proper disclosures of how the qualitative information support it. So essentially what IFRS and ISSB has done is to be able to assist to bring all this together in such a way that as you are looking at the numbers, you also have information around how the business has impacted you as a stakeholder. You also have information of how climate-related activities of businesses, are also documented and properly reflected in the financial statement. And what, without having to go back to what you have presented initially of how sustainability, ESG implementation has assisted entities to be able to create long-term value for the existence of the business, either in terms of your customer loyalty, either in terms of your supply chain, and every other thing that add to this long-term success of a business. So what you then find out, this is very, very crucial, and both financial and non-financial information are very, very important for businesses in terms of its reporting and disclosing, so that the external stakeholders will understand, how the business is performing. And I think it is now more important to start discussing this because now the various regulatory bodies that depending on the environment where you operate, if they're listed entities, then find out that SEC is interested, NSE is interested. More importantly, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria is also interested in how you report, your sustainability activities and climate-related activities, essentially. And of course, all of this, in a way, has tax impact at some point. So that has been our experience, working with various clients in providing advisory solutions on ESG, strategy development, and risk management, essentially. I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lateef. If I allowed you to go on and on, I mean, I can imagine that you just continue. But I want to hear success stories from Chioma, and then I'll come to John later. So Chioma, I would like to hear from you. I mean, given the background from Lateef that reporting is very essential, and given the level of ESG adoption in your company, how is sustainability practice adding up to your success? The success that has been recorded by Seplat Energy PLC overall. I doubt if there is anyone in the corporate world that doesn't know Seplat in Nigeria. So the question is is it just about the numbers, or is it just, are there things that are being done with respect to sustainability practices, and is it adding up to the success that the company has reported so far? And of course, how is it adding up to achieve the overall goals of the organization?
Thanks so much, Temitope, for that question. And thank you, Lateef, for an excellent introduction. In terms of our success, I think I'll start by saying that for those of you who know of the history of Seplat, we started out as Seplat Petroleum, and now we are Seplat Energy. And it's a deliberate, I think, first of all, public statement to say that you're moving from production to going to energy. And then we went forward and we now actually defined our purpose. And we said that we want to deliver energy solutions, sustainable energy solutions for today, and transform lives through energy. Now, the reasons for those things is because we needed to be able to underpin our corporate strategy and our planning with sustainability. So it wasn't just being responsible but to actually truly hold ourselves to a higher standard and to embed sustainability into our day-to-day living, business as usual, and our looking forward strategy, for our organization. So when we look at things like how have we done, how well have we done, and how has it contributed? So the first thing I would say is that the corporate scorecard, which, as we know, every organization has KPIs either for the organization or in combination of the corporate organization and also the leadership, has sustainability goals, ESG goals already embedded. What that then does is that while we go about our business, while we go about production, while we go about trying to make money, as it were, we do those things sustainably and ensure that our output still stays true to those ambitions that we have. So for instance, in most recent times, we were certified for our Western assets, ISO 55001. And what that does is that it confirms significant progress, right, with our end of routine flaring program. The Nigerian government, for those of us who are aware in the oil and gas industry, the Nigerian government has set a target for 2030 for end of routine flaring. But imagine that at Seplat, for instance, we have set a steeper target for ourselves and said that within the next 1 year, we will end routine flaring. What that does for us is that we are now putting in place various processes and procedures at our various plants. So we've been certified. The Western asset business is our biggest business, as it were, situated in the Sapele area. And we're looking at things like reducing our flare gas emissions, tracking our GHG emissions, looking at how to reduce carbon intensity, and so on. We've actually also set up an accounting system, right? A greenhouse gas accounting system within our business that allows us to track and manage emissions. This is a big thing for us. It has not just helped our business in line with the goals we've set for ourselves, but from an environmental standpoint, along the ESG goals, it has actually taken us a step further down that road to success that we have set for ourselves. We've invested significantly socially. I know in the introduction, we talked around our community impact, and we looked at things like how do we impact our communities positively, both our internal employees and our community stakeholders, as well as our vendors and partners. So not only have we reduced significantly, again, because the sustainability mindset is embedded from the staff and the employees right through to our vendors and into leadership and how we run our business. So our lost time, for instance, in terms of injury lost time, has significantly reduced to be able to record 0 fatalities in our operating business so far. That is a huge success. So when we look at our impact investment in our community as well, so it's one thing to impact with money, but even most recently, we looked at the numbers around health and education programs that we have deployed in our local communities, our host communities. And we find that we are going into the 100,000s of direct impact, not indirect, people that have either been trained via education programs, teachers and students that have received healthcare support, either through our safe motherhood programs, the programs for I Can See, where we do eye surgeries in the communities, skills acquisition programs, and so much more. That is community impact. That is investing money, but also impacting and changing lives. And like I said, transforming lives through energy. Access to energy projects as well is a key goal for us, a key KPI across the business. And like I said, we own it across all areas of the business. And so wherever we go, and in whatever it is that we do, we must leave behind energy, access to energy for our host communities and those that support us and work within our environment. From a governance standpoint as well, we do have certain goals and successes that we have recorded. We were able to deliver our sustainability report aligned with the TCFD framework. You spoke about that at the beginning, Tim, when you talked around the whole GRI framework. And for us, it was a huge success that last year we not only delivered the 2020 sustainability report, it was fully aligned with reference to GRI. It was aligned with the United Nations Global Compact and the TCFD framework. That was a big success for us because it then shows that we are holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard. We are reporting as we should. And even in their day-to-day businesses, everyone is even much more aware through training and engagements that continually are held across the business, across our various bases, across the various departments and so on. From a board perspective, another success that we've recorded is that we have introduced new policies around sustainability and ESG, things like child and forced labor, which is not something that is typical to talk about in this market. But with our vendors, in partnership with our vendors, we are actually looking at forced labor, human rights, sustainable procurement, and those topics and things within our policies that we believe will drive the entrenchment of sustainability and proper ESG practices across our various businesses and across all our stakeholders. So all these things, I believe, are as a result of the fact that from the base, from the foundation, we have embedded sustainable goals and sustainability goals and ESG practices from not just our naming nomenclature, but also our strategy, our planning, our KPIs, and our objectives as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, I should say that was loaded. I mean, a lot to catch on that. The fact that community impact is what you're doing, you're transforming communities, you're providing access to energy. It's not just about sales, right? And more importantly for me, that you're holding the company to high standards. The board takes leadership, and the targets that have been set are targets that are very tall. So thank you very much for those insightful comments there. So John, to you, your company was recently recognized for a great ESG practice, but you'd agree that the landscape is also changing. Maybe first tell us, how did you even achieve that? And then, I mean, very, very succinctly, and then what are the steps you are taking to navigate the changing landscape with respect to ESG reporting and issues around ESG, or do you see any change at all? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tobe. Let me start by thanking Andersen for providing this veritable platform for ESG advocacy. That's the way to go, and that's the only way to go. It's about sustainability. And if you agree with the UN's definition of sustainability, I think 1987, that's the Broadland Commission, to be meeting the needs of the present without compromising that of the future generation. I think that's the layman's definition. And if you think of it that way, you want to look at what you are doing currently. How does it affect not just your success today, but about the future generation? Having said that, I think my organization, we are lucky because ESG seems to be in a DNA of all that we do. Because from the origin, our business is about trying to switch very high polluting fuels with a fuel that is environmental friendly. We call it a transition fuel, right? So from the very first day the business started, we are looking at how we are going to manage ESG. And then the management subscribed to, let me say, the bedrock of ESG, which is the ISO management system, the 3 frontline standards. An environment which is ISO 14001 looks at the impact of what you do on the environment. You are looking at the occupational health and safety standard. You are looking at the quality management standard, which seeks to understand customers' expectations, meet or even exceed those expectations. So having this building block, we try to build on it. In 2017, when Axela was rebranded, we tried to look at it further because sustainability morphed from just risk management framework or risk management or regulatory compliance framework to opportunities framework, something that we use to leverage and then get new opportunities that are coming with sustainability. So we decided to look at other options on what we will do, to advance ESG in our organization. So we subscribe to IFC. If you know IFC, so it has to do with all the sustainable practices. So from assessment and management of social and environmental risk, to labor and working conditions, to resource efficiency, community health and security, whether it's land acquisition, biodiversity, indigenous people, or cultural heritage. Those are the things when you look at them and then you execute your projects or operations, it guarantees sustainability, of your business. We are also a subscriber to the EcoVadis. So they have a framework where, they look at all the ESG drivers and then we comply. So those are the many things, we do as an organization to comply to ESG, and the results are very obvious to see. As an organization, we have achieved an A long-term rating and A2 short-term with stable outlook, and we think that should be upgraded based on what is happening recently. The news as at January, from January till now, says that I think European Union, they are looking at natural gas, even as a green energy, because when we are talking about sustainability or greener energy, we are not talking about something that doesn't just release carbon to the environment. We are looking at the other options available. The basic option is that there is right to energy, affordable energy, and cheaper energy. And natural gas today has that solution. So today they are considering natural gas as an option, call it green fuel, and that will do a lot. So we received World Finance Oil and Gas Award for the most sustainable company in Africa. And that's thanks to our ESG practices. Of course, the ERM CVS certification, they just certified that we are fully compliant to the IFC performance standards. And since 2017, just beyond looking at what we do as, let me say, as a transition fuel, because when you switch, the alternative to natural gas will be JTF fuels like HFO, like diesel, or black oil. Their carbon footprints are very high. So these are an alternative. Depending when the technological development allows you maybe to use a battery the size of your phone to drive your car. Natural gas is a fuel of the future or the midterm. So that is what we do. Between 2018 and 2020, we estimate that just by customers switching from the fuel they are using to natural gas, we've been able to save up to 1.7 to 3 million tons of CO2 from being emitted, those alternative fuels. And based off our ISO compliance, we are the first in the industry to achieve the trifecta of ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and of course, ISO 18001, 45001, all integrated. So we're the first in the oil and gas industry to do that. And between 2012 to today, we have 0 FTI free man hours. So we have no fatality in our operations, and we have achieved over 7 million FTI free man hours between January 2012 to today. These are the advantages of strict implementation of ESG practices. And between the time I'm talking to now, we have 0 regulatory infraction. So not only have we achieved the objective of being clean with the regulators and managing our risk, this is also a strategy in that we are seeing investors looking at us and being happy with us and approaching us. This means access to funds or cheaper funds to execute the many infrastructure requirements that this space requires. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Lots of success stories there, and I'm sure some people will be wondering, is Axilla listed so that I can buy the shares of Axilla? Because this looks like a company that very soon it will be a lot of funds to get one of the shares of the company, right? But I mean, as an ESG person, I'm excited, right? But I want to ask, right? That's to near now. Because some people would again say that, I mean, when I check the profit of organizations and the most profitable in Nigeria, say in 2022, maybe I don't find Axila there, right? So Nair, I come to you as an ESG advisor. How do you define success for a corporate organization? Given what John has said, right? Some of the things that he's mentioned, no fatality, for instance, in a particular year. In other words, is there a reason to be concerned about sustainable success? Is success not just success, right? I mean, how else do you define success? If the money is coming and then my name is there that, oh, I made so much revenue and so much profit and so much dividends to give to investors and shareholders, is it just okay to say I'm successful? Or are there other things you look into, some of the things maybe that John has mentioned, or other things that you think about as an ESG advisor?
Thank you so much, Temitope, for the question. It's a very interesting and apt question because as an advisor, I am not just an ESG advisor, I am a business advisor to my clients. So it should make business sense to them to become a sustainable company. And though it may sound counterintuitive that spending more money on sustainable business practices can boost companies' profitability, but there are studies that show that most sustainable companies are also the most profitable ones in the long run. So you have to see that it's a long-term journey that we're looking at, and considering a value-driven approach when developing business strategies can be vital to long-term success. And we can see here the two examples of Seplat and Excella. They are established businesses and they have sustainability in the core of their business strategy, which means that they are the live examples of how a sustainable practice can mean so much to a long-term success for an organization. You have to understand that in addition to driving social and environmental change, sustainability initiatives can contribute a lot to an organization's overall success. Let us understand with the example of a few studies that have been done that paying attention to environmental, social, and governance issues is becoming increasingly critical for all companies across industries. And this is evident in a latest survey. 83% of the C-suite executives and investment professionals mentioned that ESG programs will generate more shareholder value in 5 years' time than they do today. So in the long run, they will have the value generator. In another research on responsible leadership, companies with higher rating on ESG performance enjoyed average operating margin 3.7 times higher than those with a lower ESG performance. So simply put, sustainability is a business approach to creating long-term value by taking into consideration how a given organization operates in the ecological, social, and economic environment. Sustainability is, as it defines, is built on the assumption that developing such strategies fosters companies' longevity. In the long run, it will determine their success. So that's it from me.
Thank you very much. Maybe in another way, Modupe, I'd like you to maybe give us an idea of what you think in your work as a lead researcher with SGC, and that's the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. What sort of correlation have you seen between strong ESG implementation and the financials of companies? Do you have empirical data, for instance, to support such correlation?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Temitope. So usually at the beginning of every ESG journey for a company, they will usually go through data collection and reporting, and that's usually the preliminary stage of every ESG journey for most companies. But this in itself doesn't actually guarantee financial performance. However, studies have shown that there is a link between strong ESG factors, factoring ESG into risk management. There's been studies to show that it has actually improved the bottom line. In a McKinsey quarterly report titled 5 Ways ESG Creates Value, it showed that there was actually a strong link between ESG factors being incorporated into a company and strong financial performance as well. Also, McKinsey did an analysis of about 2,000 studies, and the aggregated evidence of this study showed a 63% correlation between ESG and financial performance. So you may actually ask, how then can ESG bring about financial improvement or improve the bottom line? So I've identified 5 ways in which ESG can actually improve a company's financial performance. But first, I would like to use what was submitted by the New York University Stern Center for Sustainable Business. They actually identified that when ESG is tied to risk management and strategy planning, it actually brings about strong financial improvement and actually improves the bottom line. So these are the ways tying ESG into your risk management and strategy can actually help to improve the bottom line. First, it prevents against reputational damage. Companies that don't take their ESG, especially with the environmental and social bits, companies that don't take those aspects into consideration sometimes do find themselves in reputational issues whereby, let's take, for example, maybe an oil company that doesn't take the environmental pollution factors into consideration, and then they have oil spillage. It actually could lead to reputational damage that could affect their bottom line. So when companies actually integrate ESG factors into their strategy planning, their risk management, we're seeing that they're able to prevent reputational damage that could lead to financial losses. Also, ESG being factored into risk management and strategy planning helps to prevent against heavy regulatory fines. So the same thing, the same example using the oil company, when oil companies have issues with like oil spillage, they could risk being fined heavily, and these heavy fines actually affects their financials. So companies have to actually obviously consider that if you don't do the right thing, you could actually risk regulatory fines. And if you do the right thing, you would prevent the company from actually having to pay heavy fines for issues. So also, I feel factoring ESG into risk management and strategy planning also helps to reduce cost, like electricity reduction, maybe moving towards solar usage in the company for certain things, reducing the times you have to use things like the generator. These operational costs actually eventually in the long run would lead to an improvement in your financials.
Thank you so much, Mudukwe. And you've talked a lot about risk. I was going to come to Lateef, and I mean, but with all that you've said, my question would then be, how do you address this risk? Because you've raised some of those things. Yeah, ESG would help address them, but Lateef, how do you exactly address those risks? That's one. And two would be, how practicable is it to combine financial reporting with ESG reporting, especially looking at what IFRS is now asking and what's the working group that has been set up by the FRC, and that's the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, is also saying that by January 2024, companies preparing their financial statements need to pay attention to the disclosure requirements of IFRS S1 and S2. How can I combine that as a company? What do you think, Lateef?
Temitope, thanks. I think you have 2 questions in one, so I'll take it one after the other. So the first has to do with how entities will be able to combine financial reporting with, of course, the requirement of ISSSB and IFRS with respect to reporting your sustainability activities. Of course, you are spot on with respect to 2 standards that I just released, and these standards, IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, will become effective from the annual reporting starting 1st January 2024. So what that speaks to is that at the end of 2024, financial statements that will be reported should have all these aligned with the two standards that have been released. One is on sustainability related disclosures, and the other is on the climate related disclosure. Of course, there are transition released for that, so I won't go into the details of that. Now to the question. So typically, when you have this kind of standards and you have a particular date when you need to cut off and when you need to report based on the standards. So you have a period where you then need to assess yourself to see, one, how these standards will impact everything that you do from the point of your business. How is it going to have business impact, reporting these disclosures? Two, you look at how this is going to impact your system and processes today, your internal system and processes, because you need data, you need information to be able to report in line with these standards. So you look at it from the system side and process. Does your system support the effective reporting of these standards in conformity with the requirement of the standards? So you look at the system and the process impact. More importantly, you also look at your accounting practices. For instance, how are you going to be tracking information that will be reported in line with this standard? So you also need to assess yourself to see whether what you have today will be able to meet such reporting requirements. If it does not, what do you need to do ahead of time? And then lastly, it's also going to impact people. What I mean is that people have assigned responsibility and tasks today, based on what they do today. But with these standards, you want to be sure that this is not going to create another, skill gap for people who are going to, be working with these standards. So do they have full knowledge of what this standard requires? Two, do you have adequate manpower to be able to even, if you want to report based on this standard, do you have adequate manpower? Will it not create additional money requirements for you? Essentially, you have to assess yourself on all this. And when you do this assessment, if you have gaps in your current, arrangements, so there's a need for you to then have a plan to mitigate such a gap along the lines of what all the factors that I've mentioned. And essentially, it then prepares you ahead of your reporting, period of 2024. And essentially, this is how to move from the current state to the state where you are able to comply with the two IFRS standards, so that I don't waste a lot of time. So there are more details to that. So, and I feel that every entity that is going to comply with this should start this journey now. You don't have to wait till 2024. So there's a need for you to do your readiness assessment, before the end of the year, so that when you then come into 2024, you are well prepared for this transition to these new standards. That's one. Now, on the other question, which is the risk. Truly speaking, when you look at the risk landscape globally, in the last couple of years, I can tell that ESG and sustainability reporting has changed the risk landscape. And what do I mean? If you check a number of investments and funds, even investors, globally, the investment decisions are now being, impacted or being based on ESG agenda of these different funds. So investors don't want to even invest in businesses that don't have ESG and climate-related, strategy or agenda. Essentially, I mean, I've got a quite number of clients that want to invest, but the investment they are looking for, they don't want to invest in any activity or business that doesn't have any ESG impact. So funds are now being invested in impact areas. So it's a major risk for organizations that have not, developed their ESG strategy and journey. It's going to impact, your ability to access capital and funding, including expanding your business as we speak. So that has changed the risk landscape. If you also, them more into other areas. In some other climes, customers are now looking at products from ESG perspective. They only want to patronize businesses, or they want to patronize products that have ESG, components as part of the product's, development, so to say. So is a major risk in that area as well. So you can see ESG itself has other imperatives that if organizations do not take care of this ESG agenda, it then begins to create other risks for them. And more importantly, very recently, you also find that financial reporting is now very focused on this because of the new IFRS standard with respect to these two, agenda, sustainability and climate related. So it poses more, regulatory, risk because your financial statement should then be able to communicate succinctly, how you have been able to deal with sustainability related activities, and you want to disclose to your stakeholders. You want to have more information about your activities and all of that. So it has regulatory risk. And even under the regulatory risk, when you go back, Climate Change Act of 2021, has also posed a lot of regulatory risk to entities in Nigeria, because at some point, organization will now be required to file, climate, related reports with the council that was established, and as such, Nigerian companies should just get ready for compliance. Of course, it's not still clear the roadmap for that compliance, but organization should then focus on how they will get prepared ahead of that obligation of filing. And essentially, it's also a regulatory risk that needs to be catered for. For companies operating and are listed in Nigeria, definitely is more regulatory requirement from SEC and NSE. And essentially, beyond the assurance report you have to file to SEC or in your annual report, SEC also wants to ensure that you have proper disclosures in your financial statements. So these are major risks. And if we go on and on, there are a lot of other risks that ESG as an agenda, as placed on the table of every entity operating in Nigeria. And that's why it's very instructive that organizations should then relook their governance, look at the board agenda with respect to strategy, which is very key. So there should be a major strategy around your ESG journey. In fact, it's also a strategy risk if you do not have, ESG and the climate change agenda as part of what the board reviews every time. So it's a strategy risk, which can therefore also pose a lot of challenges to organizations going forward. More importantly, the board risk committee should also look at the fact that now ESG is posing a lot of risk, and it's a major risk that has to be part of the annual of the plan for such. And as such, I expect that the board risk committee should also pay a lot of attention to this risk and how it's been identified, the process for identification, aggregating of data, measurement of such data, essential, especially the materiality threshold, and for you to be able to, for organizations to be able to monitor and report effectively, this risk. I don't know whether this is adequate, Tim. I think I'll stop here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I have to come to Nea, because I can imagine some of my participants will be wondering, so where do I start from? What exactly? I mean, you're talking IFRS, you're talking Climate Change Act, you're talking virtually everything. So, so Nea, what's the recommended reporting framework for ESG reporting for corporate organizations? For instance, let me just say, since many corporates are now taking it seriously, are there some multi-jurisdictional denominators? Like, what are the things that maybe someone wants to see at the global scale, for instance, in an ESG report or a sustainability report? And how does it align with the fact that, okay, if I'm now preparing my financial statement and I need to align with IFRS S1 and S2, what would you recommend? What's the sort of strategy? And I know that one of our participants, for instance, had even reached out to say, so how do I come up with a strategy, right? And all of that. So I'd like to hear from you, Nair.
Thanks, Temitope. And the question is, again, this decision could be very overwhelming for someone who's just starting their journey in sustainability, because there are so many ESG reporting frameworks available that one who's starting the journey may be overwhelmed, whether I should go to the mother framework, which is GRI. Should I adopt two frameworks, that is GRI along with TCFD? Or should I simply go for IFRS new standards that will be a complete universal standard, which is where I wanted to add to what Latif has mentioned, is that IFRS is not only giving you a platform where you're reporting your financial and non-financial parameters. It is giving you a universal one standard whereby all the companies that are using different standards can move to this one standardized format of reporting their ESG strategies, so that the investors have more clarity as to how they will compare company A to company B, because now they will know, okay, these are the parameters on which company A has also reported, and similarly company B has also reported. So using the universal standard definitely makes more sense for companies who are just starting their journey. But the matured players who are already using GRI, TCFD to report their sustainability reports, they can just do a reality check as to are there any gaps that they need to fill when seen along with IFRS. So if there are any additional requirements, they can simply start reporting on those. But yes, when someone's trying to choose a framework, first you have to understand what's the purpose of your ESG reporting framework, because it should be well aligned to your solution. And then assessing which framework is better suited to your industry and your company type, because considering credibility in the ESG reporting framework is also another aspect, that how that framework is recognized globally and how that is recognized and accepted by industry stakeholders. Again, assessing the scope and coverage of the ESG factors that your company is focusing on, whether are they covered in the ESG framework that you're choosing. It's again very important. So it is important to understand the scope and coverage for your ESG factors in the framework that you're going to use to do your ESG reporting. Further, the current regulatory requirements in your jurisdiction, like the Climate Change Act in Nigeria or the SEC requirements, so you have to be mindful of those requirements. So it could eventually be you are using a multiple ESG framework simultaneously to create a more accurate ESG report. That will be, I think, the best suited way of looking at this problem. So it could be using multiple ESG frameworks to prepare your own accurate ESG report.
Thank you very much, Nair. I think that clarifies a bit more for especially people who are starting their ESG journey. And I'd like to come to Chioma. So what do you think? Would you say that sustainability practices are simply for big corporates like yourself, or are there ESG related issues that you're even trying to look into, for instance, when you're trying to onboard partner firms or vendors? And why do you do this if you do? All right.
All right. Thanks very much, Temitope. So, you know, when we spoke earlier, and I think everybody sort of contributed to the importance of ESG and the various pillars, and the fact that more and more from an investment perspective, and that's both national, local, and I think international investment, more organizations are being looked at for investment opportunities and the relation with their ESG practices. So what does that tell you? It means that not just large companies that are listed in Nigeria Stock Exchange or the UK Stock Exchange, for instance, like Seplat, but also even SMEs and smaller vendor partners are also being looked at now for sustainability goals and then ESG practices. So I don't think it's restricted to large organizations. I think it cuts across even more now than ever. Reason is the large corporates such as my organization, for instance, has vendor partners. 60% literally of our work is done by contractors, is done by vendor partners. So if we say we are practicing ESG and we have an ambition to be this truly sustainable organization and to deliver and transform lives sustainably, then if the partners and the vendors that we have that contribute 60% of our output or the work that is done, if they are not being held accountable, if they are not also practicing, if they are not also having those sustainable goals within their own framework, then we really cannot say that we are achieving our goals and our ambitions. So taking that further, like I mentioned earlier, at Seplat, for instance, we have introduced 6 new policies, and those policies that we introduced and board approved this year include our vendors, and we are striving even from our procurement policy to have a sustainable procurement policy, a policy that allows us to onboard our vendors into what our ambitions and our goals are from an ESG perspective, to help identify what those ESG issues are in the supply chain management of our organization. So when we look at vendors, we actually start from the identification, validation and verification of vendors, looking at those ESG practices, looking at performance against those ESG goals and ambitions that we have. So our policies and our procedures clearly already communicate that, look, these are the requirements, these are the expectations for our supply chain, for our vendor partners. So for those of them who are not already where they should be, we go through a training process. We go through engagement sessions on a regular basis to onboard them. We have specific communication channels where we are able to pull them together to say, look, from an environmental standpoint, these are the expectations. When we speak about emissions, GHG emissions, we look at biodiversity policies, we look at how much are you replacing to the environment from what you are taking away. It's not just the Seplat team, it's also looking at the vendors in the asset business, in the asset basis. How much are they taking out from the environment, and how much are they putting back in their own smaller businesses, and helping them to understand how best to do it. Things like community impact, and looking at community programs and community projects and impacting the host communities positively. It's not just an expectation from Seplat as an example, or from the large corporate, but also from the vendor partners as well, ensuring that the host community involvement cuts across from the large corporate to the smaller vendors. Anti-bribery, money laundering, conflict of interest, human rights, labor rights as well are things we hold ourselves accountable to in the large corporate like Seplat, but also our vendors are also held accountable. So when we look at the contracts that are drawn up, we ensure that the sustainability goals are embedded, and KPIs are embedded in those contracts, and they stay true to them, and they're evaluated based on them at the end of the day. So both ways, in trying to deliver impact and trying to drive sustainability, we start from within. We start through our vendors and our smaller partners, and then we look at ourselves. And so that way, I think a responsible large organization is able to help, to bring up these smaller businesses and smaller organizations to start to see and understand the impact of their business on the environment, impact of their business on society, impact of their business from a governance perspective as well.
Thank you very much. That's loaded. I'm going to come to John very quickly, because Chima just mentioned something around tracking carbon emissions and all of that. So from an environmental perspective, do you track carbon emissions? What tools do you deploy for that purpose in your organization, for instance? How do those internal processes help in achieving the overall objective of your company or the group altogether?
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Chioma. Nice presentation. So you asked about the tools we use in tracking carbon emissions. So you have qualitative, you have quantitative. So as a starter, from the qualitative arm. So, but I mentioned earlier about the EcoVadis platform. It's a platform that, clearly outlines what do you measure, how do you measure it, and how do you report it. And then from there, it can be, appraised and have a score. Last time we had a silver rating for EcoVadis. But beyond that, you have physical installations you can do. For instance, as a gas distribution organization, it's a given that we are good in metering and in measurement. So for energy consumption, those are the basics: energy, water usage, or waste management. There must be a baseline on how what do you utilize, what amount of energy do you utilize, and then when you baseline, you should now be able to set target. How do you reduce? You now look at your energy footprint and see what you can do, differently to reduce energy consumption. Same goes to waste. So you measure your waste, and then year on year, you now try to see what you can do, to reduce it. And then from there, you can now go on. Where we are currently, we have automated systems. You do not need to flick the switch when you are going out. So a simple motion sensor, switches off the light when no one is in the building. So you don't need to turn off the tap, or you say you forgot to turn off the tap. So nobody is there, the tap goes off. So those are automated measures that you can use to, control or manage. Then for gas emissions, we have a strategy. We have a framework on how we manage our GHG, or how we measure it. So there's a framework that says for every scum of gas, this is the equivalent in terms of a kilowatt of electricity. So if you say you've consumed, for instance, 1 million scum of gas, there's an equivalent, or you convert it to a CO2 equivalent. If it's diesel, if it is HFO, or any of them. So for our Scope 1 emissions, that is those that are related directly with what we do, the energy we consume. So for instance, our gas turbine, we know the volume of gas we consume for the month. So it's very easy to convert. For Scope 2, there's maybe even customers using our gas to run their processes. There's a way we do that. For grid electricity, there's a conversion, for that. All those goes into how we convert, and we say we've been able to save so amount of million. I talked about 3 million tons of CO2 since we started measuring from 2017 to date. We saved more than 3.7. So that's how we were able to, categorize that. And there are many other areas we can use. There are automated systems, like I said, we can install. GHG measurement reporting framework, I said, the sustainability framework, the GRI also outlines how you can also measure and report those ones. And there are also the qualitative indicators I mentioned. The energy sinks. For instance, we are a very big partner to LabSpark in Lagos. Over the years, we've helped them to plant over 14,000 trees. What that means is that we are part of the energy sink initiative. So not only that by the nature of our products are we saving emission, we are also involved in afforestation initiatives that become sink. So there's an equivalent to, let me say, a certain volume or concentration of trees and the kind of emission savings we get from that. So those are simple ways you can measure. Like I said, you start from the baseline, which is energy utilization, water usage, and also waste. And then from there, you can progress to other areas you can use to measure the energy that you are doing.
Thank you very much, John, for breaking it down. I'm sure that those who may have been bothered about what are the practical steps, it's clear that these are actually things that you can implement within the organization and, of course, tied to the success of the organization. So, Chairman also raised an issue earlier with respect to how you then support small organizations, training them and all of that. And I would like Modupe to maybe weigh in on that aspect and tell us a bit of what do you think companies can do to implement the sustainability imperatives effectively? And I ask this because employees in the long run will be responsible for most of the to-dos, right? And that we'll then have different departments, procurement, we'll have the contracting, we have say the finance department, very many departments within a typical organization. So do employees outside of the sustainability department, if there is anything like that in a company, do they have a role in domesticating and implementing ESG policies? And how exactly do you get them to do that, Mudupe?
So yes, one has to look at ESG holistically. So if you're just saying ESG has to be taken care of by the sustainability team in the company, you wouldn't integrate ESG policies properly. It won't be embedded. It won't be embedded into the spirit of ESG, and it wouldn't be properly implemented in the company. So I feel ways in which companies can actually ensure that everyone is carried along, all the employees are, despite their different backgrounds and different roles and different departments. I think ways companies can actually make sure that the ESG goals for the companies are aligned is by one, obviously making sure that the employees are properly trained. Training is essential to understanding ESG factors and how that ties into risk management and strategy planning for the company. Also, the company needs to establish a very clear vision. This needs to be very concrete, very clear, easy to understand so that everybody follows and there is actually an understanding. Company also needs to create an effective means of communication so that everybody's able to share information. Departments are able to share information amongst themselves. They're able to track success. Maybe one department is doing well, the other department can tap into that to say, okay, how are you guys able to implement your ESG policies and metrics? Also, I feel like making them feel like they're part of it. So allowing for them to be able to be involved in actually establishing some ESG policies in the company, especially with social policies, maybe doing some internal surveys, just to understand the level of awareness in the company to see, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to do to improve the social bit of our ESG policies? So that's just basically what I feel companies can do to actually make sure that everybody's tied into their ESG goals and everybody's tied into the general ESG policy implementations for the company. So I just feel making sure that everybody is abreast with what the company wants to do, clear vision, communication, training to make sure that they're aware of ESG policies. And usually the employees are the first to know when things go amiss in a company. So when they actually are properly educated on ESG policies, ESG factors, ESG criteria, now that ties into helping the company achieve its goals and helping to improve financials and helping to increase the bottom line in the company. I feel like when they have a proper understanding, in that way they're able to be able to align with the goals of the company with regards to its ESG policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insightful contributions. So I'll come to you, Nair. And you'd agree with me that competitiveness is a factor to consider for success-driven enterprises. And we're talking about sustainable success here, right? So how does ESG practice help to drive competitiveness? Is it simply by copying and pasting what others are doing and report them and say, I do them also, whether I do them or not?
Sorry, can you please repeat your question? Are you talking about competitiveness?
Yes, I'm talking about competitiveness, and I'm saying, how does the ESG practice really help to drive competitiveness? Is it as simple as I check what Seplat is doing and I say I do them as my company? I set up a Tokwe Energy PLC and I go copy what Seplat has said it's doing, and I say to people, I do them as well. So I'm as good as Seplat, so I'm successful. Am I being competitive that way?
No, I don't think that approach would be appreciated. See, a robust ESG program can open up access to large pool of capital, which we've already heard from the panelists, that an investor is looking at a company where his money is safe and where his growth is sustainable in the long term. So a robust ESG program is a base for any organization to remain competitive in the long run, because you have to understand all the companies are in their sustainability journey. They are looking at how to embed ESG practices into their business strategy. So in this rapidly changing business climate, attention to these ESG issues is becoming critical to long-term competitive success, because the capital is there is a large pool of capital, but who's going to get that capital is only those organizations who have strong corporate brand, who promote sustainable long-term growth, and which is going to again in turn benefit the companies and its investors. So strong ESG programs can increase stock liquidity, because individual and institutional investors are investing massive pool of capital in corporations that proactively govern and operate in an ethical and sustainable manner. So sustainable practices will attract capital. ESG initiatives can unlock competitive values, because companies that recognize importance of adapting to changing socio-economic environmental conditions are better able to identify strategic opportunities and meet those competitive challenges. So proactive and integrated ESG policies can widen a company's competitive relative to other industry players. So if you have to be competitive, you have to take innovative strategies, like we heard Seplat and Excella improving their technology, improving the monitoring mechanism of how they can reduce wastages, how they can ensure the GHG emission is tracked appropriately, and the paths, their roadmap to reducing those emissions is in place. All these are initiatives that they are simply improving upon year-on-year basis. And a proactive stance on ESG issues can keep activities at bay. Like activists have used governance weaknesses as a tool in proxy contests and campaigns. So to keep those activists at bay, you have to have proactive stance on ESG issues. So these activists are increasingly targeting management teams and boards that fail to take a proactive stance on potential environmental and social issues. So you have to be mindful of where the things are moving, how things are being looked at. There are various examples where companies have failed because of poor governance, where companies have failed because they did not pay heed to the environmental issues that these companies are creating. So, and you have to understand that ESG investors are stickier. They are value-based investors who are more interested in what happens during the next decade than the next quarter. They're not looking at a short-term story, they're looking at a long-term story. So you have to understand that these changes will take time. They understand the investor is incorporating ESG into their mandate. Often they are strengthening it by making sure that the long-term value over a multi-year period is created rather than a sugar high or a near-term investor benefit. So companies that are espouse strong ESG values tend to attract and retain the best talent. Millennials care deeply with what the companies are doing. There are various examples that I have come across where employees, good resources are attracted more to those companies that have better ESG policies, whether it is social as well as even environmental policies. So companies who are bothered about, who are embracing the values, the employees are also attracted to those. So it will create your brand value, it will attract investors to you, it will create a long-term value. So you have to be very mindful of how you choose or put in place the ESG practices. They should be in line with the mission of the organization, in line with the vision of the organization. So a simple copy paste will not work here. It has to be thought through. It has to be done in the right order by first understanding, doing a stakeholder analysis, understanding what are your material issues, and then aligning and defining your ESG strategies around those. So yes, that's a very, very important step, because that's the first step in your sustainability journey. So you should pay a lot of attention to that, is what I can advise.
Thanks, Naya, for those insightful comments. And I mean, I would like to also hear from Chuma at this point. I mean, what I try to describe is something like greenwashing. And I'm wondering what you would advise organizations to do in terms of assessing the risk of being accused of greenwashing or social washing. Someone has asked the question, for instance, how are CSR initiatives different from sustainability practices? So I'd like to hear from Richard.
All right, thank you. I actually saw that question and I smiled. So I think a bit of what Neha said around the gathering material data and just having the right analysis in place. So when it comes to greenwashing and my understanding of it, it goes back to your reporting standards. We've all spoken about various reporting standards. We've all spoken about the quality of our reports. We've all spoken about the reporting principles. So being able to adhere to the principles, being able to be transparent about the information and reporting the right kind of information. One of us here spoke around data collection and data analysis. So when you stand the risk of being accused of greenwashing, to avoid that, I think you go back to what it is you adhere to. What are the principles? What are the reporting principles? What are the standards, like Neha said, that you adhere to? What are the standards and what are the principles that are guiding the reports that you are presenting? How do you even report it? How is the presentation done? So when I look at my organization and I say that one of the successes we recorded last year was being able to standardize our reports based on certain principles that are globally recognized. Be you a small organization or a large organization, understanding that those principles are in place and that whatever it is you're reporting is clearly done along those principles, that is of high quality, that your information is balanced, it is accurate, it is clear, it is compatible and comparative to other organizations within your sector, that it is also verifiable. Garbage in, garbage out at the end of the day. So whatever it is, and I think John spoke at length around how they are metering and measuring and tracking the various parameters within his business, within his organization. So all those things are evidence-based data, evidence-based information. So you're not just doing a copy and paste. You do have principles, you are guided. Those principles are declared, they are recognized, they are global or regional or international. The data that is utilized is transparent, it is available, you can verify it, and you report it and present it in a format and in a quality and in a way that those who are viewing it, and I would use, again, my organization as an example, is that we have had to even look at how we present it on our website. It is public information. It is important that it is public. It is important that those investors and customers and stakeholders can go onto a public site and be able to click through, read, question, ask, click back, click down a few steps and be able to say, where is this coming from? What is the evidence? How do you showcase it? And that sort of, I believe, helps to be able to come against or stand against that particular risk. And if you do stand that risk, you must go back to your basics. You must go back to your foundation. The question around CSR is something that I think before sustainability became the buzzword that it is now and became the set of principles that it is now, everybody went into the whole corporate social responsibility and spoke a lot around community efforts and spoke around CSR projects and volunteering. So ESG or sustainability is really about ESG, environment, social, and governance. And the way I see the CSR projects and corporate social responsibility initiatives is that it sits within that social piece. But as it sits within the social piece and you're looking at the fact that, like we said, it's about being It's about the practices of our business and how it impacts the economy, how it impacts the community and the environment around us, and how we practice those things. So we all, as businesses, exist within a host community, and how we not just give back by gifting, which is kind of like what CSR ended up being, but by actually leaving behind sustainable projects, by leaving behind a community or society that can keep going forward, right, is very important. So that is, I think, how it differs. So CSR would sit within the S part, but it'll sit within there looking back again at the business context. And let me use my business. When we go and we say that we have pillars of impact within our community around health and around education, energy must always be there. We must always say that in as much as we have impacted the community by providing services and support, we must also ensure that the community has a way of continuing these things that we have done, either through the training that we have put in place, either through the energy projects that we have left behind that they can continue to use to continue to develop. It's about sustainable development. So CSR projects, which sit within the social, must be seen to not just help the immediate, but look into the future and ensure that development and the impact continues beyond the company's time in that community, and ensures that whether the company is continuously doing those things, the community can, sort of carry on those projects, can still continue to develop, taking on board the learning and the impact that the organization has put in place and taking it forward. So access to energy, beyond access to health, quality health, which is one of the SDG goals, and education, right, is another way of just saying that we are going beyond a community project and saying that the community can now self-sustain and continue to do those things, beyond the organization's lifetime or work within its immediate environment. So it is within. That's the long and short of it. CSR is within.
Yeah, that's lots of insights there. So Modupe, I'll come to you. What's the role of the company's board in driving the implementation of ESG imperatives? If I should ask differently, can it be simply delegated? Can we hire a sustainability officer, for instance, and say, let him basically draft a strategy, let him oversee the reporting? I mean, all that we need the board to do is a sign off, maybe. What do you think?
So the board of every company that's like the engine room. I like to use this analogy of a ship. A ship will not work without its engine room. So that goes to say that the board will not, the company won't work properly if the board isn't properly implementing things personally. So the job of the role of the board when it comes to ESG implementation is that of oversight. The board has to oversee, properly look through. While they can delegate, they can't just absolve themselves of the responsibility of actually properly implementing ESG policies. So the board can actually have like a committee, a sustainability committee, depending on the size of the company, that would actually, report on ESG policies, its implementation, how the company is able to, factor in ESG criteria into maybe risk management and strategy planning, but it still doesn't absorb the board in its entirety of the duty of oversight. So they can't just say, now that we have a sustainability committee or maybe a sustainability director, this is just the job of the sustainability director, just report to us and take care of everything. The board in its entirety has to be involved. And I think in order for the board to be properly involved, they also need to be able to, because we see that ESG is still relatively new. It's still in its infancy stage, especially in Nigeria. Every member of the board actually has to be properly educated on ESG, what ESG is about, how to implement ESG factors into the company. And now that obviously helps in the long run to achieve, financial success and to make sure that the company actually lives on for several years. So I think education is very important, but the board can't just simply delegate. they have to be involved in their entirety. While they can actually give some duties to maybe the sustainability committee and the director, obviously most times sustainability directors are experts. They would have probably proper training in ESG, and that way they have more insight into ESG trends, what is going on in ESG and things like that. And they're able to feed this information back to the board, but it's a collaborative effort. The board can't just absorb itself fully of the responsibility of overseeing the implementation of ESG policies. And at the Society of Corporate Governance, we have a book on ESG and how the board can implement these policies, and it's in print and will soon be out, but we go into how the duties of the board in terms of oversight, what the board has to do, and how imperative it is that the board actually looks at this as something like with all policies, like something that they have to be personally involved, not just one or two people from the board. It's general, and it has to be done with an holistic approach. So with a holistic approach rather. So yeah, that's just my take on that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Modupe. Nea, you had the comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Modupe has rightly pointed out, that the board has to oversee the whole function of ESG. Not just because ESG has become important, but also ESG is interwoven into every role in the organization. Whether you call it operations, you call it the HR function, you call it the investors cell, every C-suite officer is involved in the ESG integration of the policies into all the roles in the organization. So that's a bigger role. ESG is not in silo, it cannot be done. It has to be interwoven into everything the company is doing. So that's just the point I wanted to add to what Modupe has mentioned.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. So I'll come to Sherma, and then I'll wrap up with you and Lapsi for this session. So, Sherma, how can a corporate organization I would say, how can they identify ESG risk and manage them effectively? We've talked a lot about these things from a general perspective and all, but how would you advise an organization to deal with it? I mean, from a practical standpoint and more directly.
Okay, I think Latif is probably better at answering this than me because that's his day job. But in my opinion, what are the material ESG issues that are applicable to you in your business? Let's first start by even identifying what those issues are. What are the applicable standards or frameworks that would help you to address those issues? You first need to sort of identify that. You then need to do, and I think Latif spoke about due diligence, a lot of due diligence work to identify, to prevent, to mitigate against. What are the stakeholder interests? And in looking at the stakeholder interests, you want to understand what is the role of the stakeholder in those identified issues or identified risks. Are you the one who causes it by nature of your business? By nature of your business, those negative risks, those negative issues, are you by what you do able to affect how those risks come about? Are you able to are you responsible for providing solutions? So you almost want to be able to map it out when you do your due diligence, to map out what those risks are and map out what your role is. Try to find ways in your policies and your processes to be able to minimize the effect of your role in those identified risks. So I don't think we can identify all. I may be wrong, but it's important to assess the impact, assess what the risk is, assess your role in producing those risks or impacting those risks, and then understanding how within the frameworks that have been identified you can mitigate against them. I think that's as far as I can speak, because I think it's more Latif's
I mean, Choma, you've done justice to this, you know, because I mean, the question you're asking is around risk assessment, which is how, and essentially, given the nature of ESG, you know, it's actually not one of those risks that you can sit down and just identify from the entity perspective, and essentially. So you realize that it's more of stakeholders, you know, which is what Choma has actually, you know, explained. So for the kind of risk assessment you're going to do for identification purposes, there has to be a workshop. You know, there has to be a stakeholder, you know, engagement forum where you dimension the business and how it impacts, you know, them essentially. And at the end of it all, the aim is to be able to place some sort of materiality. I mean, you prioritize those risks even after you have identified them. They have to be material enough for the organization, for the board to then choose which one they will pay attention to in terms of strategy and setting, you know, risk metrics for them. And essentially, at the end of this, you have key performance indicators you want to establish. Mind you, ESG is a journey. So even when you have identified all the risks from all the stakeholders, you can't deal with all of those risks, you know, at once. So it's a journey. So you have to focus on the material ones that border on the sustainability of the business. Essentially, you look at what are those ones that will impact your revenue, you know, significantly, you know, what are those ones that will escalate your costs if you don't pay attention to them and all of that. You know, so you have to then prioritize, you have them in terms of the order of, you know, materiality, and when those risks crystallize, what is going to be the singular exposure to that? I mean, all right, let me stop there.
All right, my time is running out, and so we'll be closing down very soon. We'll be winding down very soon. But I would like to add this to what you've just said. Maybe you speak to it. Is it a one-off thing? You've said it's a journey. If I do it this year, like the workshop you've said, is it fine to say, oh, I did it some years ago, so there's no point doing anything like that again? And to add to that, this other question, that's now that we expect IFRS S1 and S2 to begin with the general requirements for disclosures of sustainability-related financial information, and of course the climate-related disclosures in January 2024, how do you see that impacting on the obligations of corporate entities? I know you've touched on this a bit earlier, but I'd like you to take maybe 1 or 2 minutes on it again. In terms of financial and sustainability reporting going forward, how do you see IFRS impacting it? Do you see organizations saying, oh, we've done it before, we've done this workshop, we've done all of our assessments, we've identified the risk. Should we pack it and say we are now implementing, or how exactly should companies approach it?
Okay, I mean, just so that we save time, I think it should not be a one-off event. Essentially, when you're starting the journey, it's very, very important you have this workshop. And the aim is that before you then define your strategy, you know the key, you know, risks you want to have your strategy on. And when you have this strategy, there's also a need for you to start tracking and implementing. You know, you then have a strategy of how to ensure that those risks do not crystallize. Essentially, it takes time. And in our view, and some of the things we've done with some certain entities, that even when we are doing, you know, advisory engagement with entities, we tend to advise that you stay on a particular set of KPIs for as long as 3 years, you know, so that you see how you have transitioned from year 1 to 3 in terms of collection of data, you know, reduction of those risks, essentially, and how you have been able to mitigate those risks before you move to the next, you know, set of ESG risks. And another important thing is that because there are emerging issues. So when there are emerging issues that also pose some certain ESG risk to you, there's also a need for you to revalidate, you know, your risk universe. You know, to be sure that, okay, what you are paying a lot of attention to in terms of materiality has not changed, essentially. So that's why I'd say that it's not going to be a one-off thing. And because it's also a journey, of the life of the business, there will always be a periodic assessment of all of this. And of course, what we advise is that it should be a matter of strategy and target, that you have periodic a workshop to be able to reassess this. And I think the other question you have is around how organizations will then have to transition properly to IFRS reporting of sustainability and climate-related activity. I think I tried to talk about it the other time, but essentially, the journey is such that since we have between now and next year, which is 1st January, to be able to report. So we have a window, and the window is for every organization to go through and assess a readiness assessment. How ready are you to be able to, implement those standards? And I also mentioned there are 4 key things that you need to look at when you are doing that assessment. You look at how that standard is going to affect the business operation, business activity, even stakeholders, because you need to also inform the stakeholders at some point the level of disclosures that will be in the report. How those reports, they also need to understand the report when they come, when they see the report. It's not just for you to have disclosure information. It has to be understood by all the stakeholders, especially the investors, even the potential investors. The level of details that will be given, and including other people that have comments or commentaries on the report, the analysts and what have you. So there has to be that, readiness assessment and how you want to communicate the changes that are likely to come next year. What are those changes that they will see in the financial statement or the annual report, so to say. So that has to be in place. I also spoke about your systems and processes. I mean, this is going to change the way things are done. And for you to have your reporting as business as usual come next year, you have to relook the system and processes, for the collection of data, for the analysis of data and what have you. If you have a gap there, then you have to do something. So that could be system upgrade, that could be process change, that could be additional level of procedures that should be in place and all of that. That has to be done even before you transit, And from the reporting itself, it's going to change even the way the auditors are going to review, essentially. So for organizations that will be audited at the end of 2024, definitely there will be more audit requirements in terms of, disclosure requirement. I have accounted the judgment you have made, the assumptions and all that. So this is going to change the entire landscape of, financial reporting. And as such, we have to then look at where we are today. Then what do we need to do to ensure that we are ready for the adoption of that standard? And lastly, is people. At the end of the day, you need people to do all of this. Are there skills gap today? The employees that are saddled with responsibility of financial reporting, do they have enough competence and skills? So if they do, you have to train them. Essentially, you have to train them to be able to understand what is required going forward. There could be need for you to even increase the number of people, because this also poses a lot of challenge and responsibility on people. And as such, you have to look at your money requirement today, whether it's adequate. If it's not adequate, you have to then, of course, increase the number of people. And as such, it is actually a lot of work going forward. But essentially, all of this, like we've listened to other speakers, is a journey, and everything we are trying to do here, and what the standard is trying to ensure, is that we communicate with our stakeholders and we build that reputation, that brand reputation, for long-term value creation, essentially along the lines of everything that we do. Your customer loyalty, your supplier, your vendor, your financiers, they need to have confidence that this business is sustainable, and as such, in terms of the impact it's creating in society, community where it operates, it's so that it's so positive and all of that. So, of course, all of these, we also have some other impact. Like I said, by the time we adopt this standard, we also look at whether it has tax impact. Are there tax savings and all of that? So it's also a matter of details that need to be different from one industry to the other. Essentially looking at the different regulatory requirements that we have. Look at the Industry Acts, PIA. Look at the Nigeria Code of Corporate Governance. There are different requirements that borders on sustainability, and essentially entities will also need to, respond to those requirements as they move on in their journey. I think I'll start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lateef. I'm already overshooting my time, but I just crave your indulgence. I know that my panelists are extremely busy people, so also the participants, but it will take some extra minutes to just do justice to some of the questions that I see. But I would like to come very quickly to John. I mean, Lateef has spoken so much about IFRS. Nigeria now has a Climate Change Act as well as a council and a secretariat responsible for its implementation. So how do you see this development impacting on the compliance requirement for corporate organizations in Nigeria?
Thank you. I think very quickly, let me first say that we can't wait for this act to be operationalized, right? So it's something we have to do, because if you look previously, Nigeria had turned in below target performance with respect to the SDG goals, the 17 SDG goals. What this will now do is to help, jumpstart that compliance. Just recently, the National Council on Climate Change (NCCC) was, formed, established to operationalize this Climate Change Act. All right. What will now happen is that it's no longer something that you elect. Compliance with ESG is no longer an elective option. It's going to be something that will be required by most organizations, especially those exceeding 50 staff or above. So you are required to develop and implement plans geared towards fostering low carbon emission and environmental sustainability. That will be a requirement. So you'll be required to report and disclose your efforts, towards reducing your greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. Another thing that will come up will be compliance with the emission reduction targets. So several organizations, you will have your targets depending on the scope of your activities or your footprint. So for instance, in most countries in the West, most companies, organizations in the West, they have their emission targets. In which you exceed that threshold, you have to buy credit. So that means it's a debit on your book. So for you to be able to exceed the threshold given to you, you now have to trade. And that turns in the next one, which is opportunities for trading. So if your activities are such that you have a net positive balance of carbon credits, you generate less carbon emissions, you are below your target, or you are even doing more that removes carbon from the atmosphere. That goes into credit for you. And this body will be a kind of facilitating body, national body for the country. Before now, it's very difficult to do carbon trading with a lot of willing partners or potential buyers outside the shores of Nigeria. NCCC will be saddled with responsibility of galvanizing these carbon credits in country and then connecting potential buyers outside Nigeria. So there will be opportunities for emission trading, like I said, and then environmental management system will no longer be an option. It's something you have to do. Like I stated earlier, the ESG mirrors the UNDG 17 goals, the SDG 17 goals. When you look at the 17 goals, you can comfortably divide them into 3 baskets, which is people, planet, and prosperity. Almost equidistantly, or let me say equispace. You have CC, you have C in people. When you're talking of zero poverty, when you're talking of zero hunger, when you're talking of gender equality, you are talking about people. When you're talking of life on land, life below water, climate action, you are talking about the planet. And for prosperity, you are talking of clean water, you are talking of partnerships, you are talking of peace, justice, and many of them. So what am I trying to say? This becomes mandatory for Nigeria to achieve their own requirement or their own share of the SDG as stated. So it's no longer going to be an option. The NCCC is going to make it mandatory for organizations to be responsible with respect to their ESG practices going forward. And I think their job is to operationalize this. They are the operations arm of this Climate Act law.
Thank you so much, John, for that. Again, we've run out of time and someone is asking how regulators can enforce real ESG governance because companies pay lip service. I think from what you've said, what we see is that we now have organizations that are responsible for some of these things, and the expectation is that going forward, as they begin to implement what the law expects them to do, we'll see that taking shape. I would basically read out some of the questions from the panelists, and from the participants, and I'll direct them to some of our panelists. And I would expect that they also just wrap it up with that. You will take the questions together with your closing remarks. Now I'll start with Chema, because someone has directed this question to you. Says, thanks for sharing your company's ESG commitment. Beyond policies, training, and engagement, how do you assess compliance or commitment of the internal and external stakeholders you mentioned, the board, management, employees, and suppliers? Please share practical methods for accountability.
Okay, so I'll take this question and then I can wrap up. Is that what you said?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yes.
excellent. Okay, so thank you for that question. And really, two things. The first thing is I mentioned that there's a corporate scorecard for my organization. But the other thing beyond the corporate scorecard, which, kind of like you think is out there, it's for them, it goes down to the individual. So my scorecard, my KPI, what I'm accountable for as part of my deliverable for the year as a director, and every member of my team has close to 30% tied to ESG. And everybody in the organization has at least 20% of their KPIs tied to ESG. So what does that mean? It means that you can't just pay lip service. The fact that you score a succeeds, an A, a B, whatever it is your parameters are, ESG and your achievement of a KPI or goal tied to ESG, must be done. So what that then does is that it takes it from just the board saying that we are reporting and we've succeeded as an organization, and the managing director and the leadership team, that even the contractors, the contract staff, the full-time employees, and right down to our vendors who also have ESG goals in their KPIs and evaluations, right? Every single person has an accountability to the overall ambition of the organization. You can go as far as some organizations, including mine, have tied remuneration. So being able to achieve a bonus, you must, have keyed in and achieve those KPIs and those goals. And like I said, to an extent, some of us take about 30% of our KPIs and some at least 20%. And it doesn't matter what function you're in. You must not just be in the production, where we're talking about carbon emissions and co, the social impact projects, the fact that your community involvement is at a certain level, the fact that lost time injury is managed. There are various elements and various ways in which, from supply chain perspective, putting policies in place, ensuring vendor management and vendor contracts reflect those sustainable goals and ambitions. There are various ways in which every single member of the organization, diversity and inclusion, human resource management, workforce management, all those things come into play. So every single person's KPI can and should carry an ESG KPI or an ESG goal, so that every single person sees their BAU, their business as usual work, as reflecting the overall corporate ambition. So that then takes me to how I think I want to wrap up. There are two things when I was preparing for this webinar and I was thinking through how we do business, that I think is very important that everyone who is looking at ESG and sustainability and looking at the future of this world must bear in mind: communication and partnership. What you communicate internally in terms of setting the goals and setting the strategy and ensuring that every single person buys into that goal, that vision, that strategy is very important internally. How you communicate that strategy to your partners, be they your vendors, the SMEs, the community, and so on around you, is also important, that they understand that this is your vision. This is what it is you want to do as an organization. This is the role of every individual in that organization. And these are the ways in which it will be measured. It is important to communicate that. And the second thing alludes to something I think John and everybody sort of said around the fact that it's a journey. I think Lateef actually kept on harping on that it's a journey. And for you to go on that journey, you must partner. You cannot go it alone. So when we talk about the fact that how, as the regulator or the government, going to make sure people are not paying lip service, is the fact that private partnership private companies, corporates must collaborate and partner with regulators, with the government to ensure that these things are truly done, adhered to, held accountable for, and how then to drive the impact even deeper. A corporate organization who strives to have sustainable impact in community cannot do that alone without the state government, cannot do that alone without the local government, cannot do that alone without the host community partners. So you must partner for that impact to really, really, really be in place and to be sustainable beyond the lifetime of the organization. So those two things for me are very critical, and that will be my last word.
Thank you very much. Communication and partnership, we got that. Nay, I come to you very quickly. So someone is asking, in developing an ESG framework, what are the best practices and key components of the ESG tripod, especially for a financial services group? I know, Nay, that you can provide an 100-page document on this, but please, in 1 minute or two, just some suggestions on what can be done, and then you wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Temitope. I understand we are already crossing the time permitted. So if I understood the question correctly, for a financial services organization, you want to understand what could be the key areas of your ESG strategy or ESG factors that you should put in place. As a financial services sector, as an investor, you should be mindful of the financed emissions. So that's an interesting aspect that what a financial services sector should understand, that what kind of financed emissions are they creating? What kind of funding are they providing to what kind of companies? So they have to be very clear as to how they are contributing in terms of not only their own organization, but also in terms of their investments. So that's a critical aspect that companies, especially in financial services sector, should be mindful of. That's about it. Thank you.
Okay, your final comments?
My final comments is that when, as we have already discussed, that sustainability is a journey. So whenever any organization, I have seen many panelists here asking that how an MSME or a small organization can start this. It's a journey. You should not take it as a huge task. You should just start looking inwards, understand where your company stands, what are the missions and vision of the organization, and start aligning your business processes along those lines. Put your thought before you start putting in or copy pasting policies and procedures from every and any organization. It is very, very important that you understand what are your material issues. What do you want to understand? What do you want to address? What are your stakeholders bothered about? Stakeholders here could be your investor, could be your employees, could be your customers. So you have to be very mindful in the community that you're operating. What are your material issues? And as rightly mentioned by Latif, this workshop is the first starting point for any organization. So don't spend any less time on doing this step than doing the actual work. So that's
Thank you so much, Nate. Yeah, John, I'll come to you. Someone has this question. I think you're in the best position to answer, and then you wrap up. A key aspect of climate risk and opportunity disclosure requirement is a thriving carbon market, that is carbon tax, carbon emission trading, etc. And I know we had some conversations in this regard earlier. With this market and its influence in Nigeria, how do you think companies will incorporate the spirit of climate risk management and make disclosures on the metrics aspect of the TCFD framework? And then you wrap up. Thank you.
I think there's another question from Kufre. I think they're also related.
Okay.
It's on carbon credit and how it will affect. Can I throw more light on the carbon credit and how it will affect business, right? Okay. Okay, I think I tried to answer this from my last, statement, whereby I said in more developed countries, you have assigned threshold on a kind of emission is allowed. If you do exceed that emission, that means you are going to get credit from somebody else that, the activities is such that their net, carbon reduction from the activities. And I will give you an example. you get a car, what do we call it, Tokumbo, and then you look at the vehicle history, no accident, nothing. And then say, why would the person there sell the car? When you check closely, it's possible that the vehicle failed emission test. So for you to drive that vehicle abroad, possibly you are paying more tax. And then to stop that, you sell it. So we are truly at infancy, and that's the job of the NCCC to begin to put up frameworks out there, frameworks that captures some of the positive sides, like I mentioned, somebody who is involved in a forestation project. Besides the incentive, or let me say subventions or grants, how do you get value from what you are doing? And there's a whole lot of people out there in the Western countries. For instance, in Swiss, there's an agency called Click Foundation in Swiss government. Their job is to hunt for organizations around the world that have net positive carbon credits, with the view of buying them and then trying to use that to credit those organizations in Swiss that are below these targets. All right. So it's at infancy, and that's the job. That question should go to NCCC. They begin to look at ways, to accommodate and onboard, these companies at infancy. How do they, continue to make value? And as a pattern shot, as I was coming to the office this morning, there's a topical news about, I think it's a seagoing vessel captured in Nigerian territorial waters. So I was worried at the action taken. What do you do with that? It's a bunkering ship, and then the decision was is it cremate it or to bomb? Now that points to what Choma said earlier, is heart and mind. If we have the ESG at the heart and mind, it doesn't matter the agency. And now the question would have been, what would be the business of, for instance, a Navy in trying to foster the ESG objective of a country? And this is the example. You see a defaulting vessel. What do you do with that? So when you are, trying to burn that vessel down, what are the impacts? Was that considered in your overall framework of naval operation of managing the Nigerian territorial waters? Clearly, the impact, the ESG angle or the consequence of that was totally lost on those that carry that operation, just focusing on the security aspect or the economic aspect. And as we captured earlier, ESG is about those things you are doing to arrive at those numbers. So for the security agencies, what are those things you are doing to arrive at a secured or well-manned country? Now this becomes their target. So as a country, we need to think and look at what we have to do to onboard this at the level of heart and mind. And it's for everybody, irrespective of the scope of your business, irrespective of the scope of your operations. You have something to do to make sure that we progress the ESG ideals for our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Modupe. There's a question for you on small businesses, and then you can wrap up as well.
So in answering the question on how small businesses or medium to small businesses can actually incorporate ESG practices, I would say most people think it's a foreign concept, but people don't actually realize that unknowingly they're already practicing ESG practices in their company. They're already implementing ESG practices in their company. Listed things like, turning off the lights when nobody's in the room, turning off the tap when you're not using it. Little things like that are already tying into the environment.
So I think there is a glitch there. Okay. Okay, so because of time, Lateef, I would like to take your parting shot.
Yeah, so I will just keep it very simple. We've seen organizations trying to play catch-up games with the advent of digital revolution, which actually marked, the fourth industrial revolution. The fifth industrial revolution is here, and it is sustainability and ESG that is driving it. So if organizations do not want to play catch-up, now is the time to begin your ESG journey. I think that's my parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, insightful panelist contributions and participants too. We thank you very much for joining this session. I'll hand over at this point to Fumi Olani, who will do the vote of thanks. Fumi Olani.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's already afternoon. I'm sorry, I just came into the car to do this. I'm actually supposed to catch a flight. But thank you, Temitope, for doing justice and to the topic. And it was such an insightful panel session with the topic unlocking the path of sustainable success, ESG implementation imperatives for corporate executives. So I would say this is yet another explosive session in the other Andersen webinar series. And we are happy that this green area is made known through this platform. I want to say thank you so much to all our panelists. ESG, when we talk about environmental, social, and corporate governance, is actually very crucial to the going concern of every business, and by extension to every component of the microeconomics. And I recall at a session, the president of ICANN was very excited to say Nigeria was the first to implement the IFRS in Africa. And that kind of motivates us, and it allows the current or the present generation to meet their needs without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to the true protection of our environment. So thank you to Latif. Perhaps I should have said Latif last because he's our very own Latif Sirakatu. To Neha Malhotra, to John Okoro, I would say thank you. I would say thank you so much to Modupe Ogungbe. I listened, and you said so much that I can align with. To Chioma Afe, thank you. And to our indefatigable moderator and anchor, Temitope Kolade, I'll say many thanks to everyone for participating. And it's our hope that we have gained a lot of insight from the session, and it will take us only forward and never backwards. Thank you to everyone that listened, and we will sure bring you this kind of exciting and very educative platform to your doorstep very soon. It's actually our expectation that the key takeaways from this session will be useful in formulating the national policy that would address ESG concerns, and for smooth transition and adoption of the relevant IFRS as soon as possible. I thank
you so much.
We all practice this every day, switching off my light, doing those things that we do every day. I can align with it. And I would just say thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Andersen, for bringing this to us. Even to some people that may not understand what ESG is. Now it's very clear to us that we do it and we practice it every day. Thank you so much, everyone, and have yourself a great day.
Thank you so much for me, and thank you, panelists. Thank you so much. Chairman, thanks Latif, thanks Nair, thanks John. It's already getting in the evening for Nair. I know Chairman is also very early in the day. Thank you so much for your time, John. We're very grateful, Mutupe. And
thank you so much.
You're going to join us.
All right.
Yeah,
thank
bye.
you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you. Bye-bye.
Temitope for arranging this.
Bye. Thank you.